Music Magazine, a weekly review edited by Anna Instone and Julian Herbage and introduced this week by Jeremy Noble.
Next Tuesday, Leopold Stokowski celebrates his 90th birthday, and Music Magazine begins this week with a tribute by Hans Keller to this veteran conductor. First, for Leopold Stokowski, who will be 90 next Tuesday. Conducting seems to be one of the healthiest of occupations, to judge by the number of conductors who have still been active in their 80s. But it's exceptional even for a conductor to reach the age of 90 and still continue in his profession. Hans Keller, who remembers Stokowski from his early years, begins by telling us of his first impressions of the conductor.
When I saw the film Fantasia as a boy, I was revolted by the picture, which had nothing to do with the music, but fascinated by Stokowski's so-called maltreatment of Bach's organ toccata and fugue in D minor, which I felt had everything to do with the music. Senseless to blame Leopold Stokowski for being unlike Furtwängler on the one hand or Toscanini on the other, as is sometimes done. Neither of them achieved his kind of newness, neither had his kind of foresight. Stokowski, always a passionate believer in the truest, most persuasive sound, foreheard stereophony more than 20 years ago, in a talk in Music Magazine, it so happened. The records of the future, he said, will be binaural and not monaural as at present. And he made another forecast then. The record will be cut to the music, not the music to the record, meaning that the duration of records would come to depend altogether on musical durations, a problem meanwhile solved, some of it anyway, by the tape library and indeed by machines which play records without interruption. And Stokowski has approached the orchestra itself with a violently new ear, a discovering ear. Although originally an organist, he's treated string players with immeasurably greater understanding than does many a string-playing conductor, perhaps just because he didn't have the string player's professional blinkers, the expert's ear flaps. As a matter of fact, his innovations are not yet sufficiently heeded, and it's for us to say now that the orchestra of the future will evermore discover Leopold Stokowski. Two examples, both hard and factual, and both concerned with the strings, the unhappiest section of the orchestra, because the string player has to play en masse without much personal responsibility. Except the leader. Well, thought Stokowski, let's make all the first fiddlers leaders, and he rotated the leadership of the orchestra amongst its first violinists with magnificent results. The most notorious autocrat, then, had made himself responsible for the most democratic orchestral measure ever conceived, and he succeeded with it artistically. My other example of an important Stokowski innovation likewise shows his concern for individual musicality and technique. He abolished collective bowing, everybody up, everybody down, everybody at the nut of the bow, everybody at the point, and instead just defined the required sound and phrasing. You achieve it by whatever personal or technical means are at your disposal. Yes, one man's up bow sometimes is another's down bow, and phrasing is there to be heard, not to be seen, and phrasing is not produced by bowing, but the right phrasing idea should produce the most suitable bowing. And so the orchestral world rolls on stupidly with its collective bowings, but nobody has yet produced a better string sound, sounder string sense than Stokowski, and his innovations are bound to be rediscovered. Meanwhile, hear them. Strings alone. The opening section, the gradual evolution of Schoenberg's Transfigured Night. I hear myself say the non-string player is free of the string player's prejudices. But then the one-time organist of St. James's Piccadilly is free of organistic prejudices too. His orchestral arrangements, his musical realizations of Bach's organ textures, decried as tasteless, throw the composer's contrapuntal thought into clear relief, get as much of the musical truth to the surface as possible, and if the king of the instrument sounds more dignified in tone, Stokowski's orchestra is quite happy to let the dignity of the musical substance speak for itself, speak with the capacity for dynamic gradation and textural contrast which the old king can be shown to despise at his peril. Many Bach lovers may hate Stokowski's approach, but Bach himself would have loved it. Tell me what your enemies think of you, and I'll tell you who you are, whether you are somebody. It isn't easy to find a good, reliable enemy of Stokowski's, but Carl Flesch, in his memoirs, though he frantically tries to be objective, leaves no doubt about the fact that Stokowski isn't his kind of musician. An artistic ideal, he says, which strives in the first place for the greatest possible effect, will prove delusive in the long run. And yet I must confess, Flesch continues, that after Toscanini and Furtwängler, Stokowski interests me most of all present-day conductors, which only goes to prove that his personality is powerful enough to draw even the resistant into its orbit. If Flesch were alive today, he'd realize even more clearly what happens to music if it passes through personality-less musicality before it reaches us. Give me Stokowski's tastelessness every time. Those who pride themselves on their taste have it instead of everything else.